Jim Safka is the turnaround CEO of Match from 2004 to 2007. He was the CEO, and he actually joined the company after 7 flat quarters and turned the company around. He formerly worked as VP of AT&T and E-Trade. After Match, he was the CEO of Ask.com, taking on Google, no less. Adam Hanft is the CEO of Hanft Ideas and really helps companies get their stories out to resonate with more compelling brands. He was head of brand strategy at Match in Jim's term and helped Jim a lot. And I thought it would be, and Jim thought it would be, at his invite. I was like, this is a duo and trio that I think you'll find very interesting. I've got a few questions for you, but this, by design, is a conversation. We'll riff, we'll go off in different tangential directions. You can egg us along in the comments if you like, and I might pick up one of those threads as well. So, gentlemen, good to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. And I just want to clarify the 7 flat quarters were not Jim's personal flat quarters. They were the company's flat quarters. Jim has never had a personal flat quarter.
That was the challenge that was set.
I'm excited to be here. When I was at Match, there was a beautiful combination. Adam would come up with all the ideas and thinking into the future, and I had a team that could execute some of these in a pretty good way. So the combination was beautiful, and the results were also beautiful. So I think it's great. We're going to be talking about the future of online dating to have Adam here. He's written several books, but one of them is called The Dictionary of the Future. He's an expert in what's going to happen in the future. He always plays a couple of chess moves ahead. I think we're really lucky to have him with us.
Thanks, Jim. And I'm really privileged to be here. And I wouldn't say the ideas were all mine. I think the ideas were mutual. I think we worked together in a way that metaphorically is like the best relationships, which is 1 + 1 = 3. It was a lot of fun, and we really did things that were at the frontier and pioneering edge of the category, and many of them are still being reflected in the way the online dating category goes to market.
Perhaps we can set the stage. In order to go forward in time, we must go a little bit back in time to get a better sense of your context and the work that you did at Match in that heyday. What would you say are the changes that you're most proud of that you instituted during your tenures at Match?
Yeah, I would start by saying that we did quite a bit of international expansion. I was there, and we were lucky. We had a great guy leading international. His name is Joe Cohen, and Adam worked on every one of the countries that we expanded into. And one of the really important things we did was we made sure that we localized the international expansion. So in each market, we got to really understand the culture of the market and the people. And we developed the technology in a way where the local leader could have great control over what the user experience was going to be. But the work that we did with Dr. Clotaire Rapaille to understand the code or the culture of any given country, whether it was Japan or whether it was Sweden or the UK, it was a fascinating exploration where we got to understand why people do what they do in different markets and the various imprints. And I'm really proud of that work. To do it properly, it took a great investment of both money and time, but the results ended up being extraordinary. And Adam, you may want to mention some of the work we did with Dr. Rapaille.
Yes, obviously, culture is a huge driver of how people enter into sustain relationships. And for example, in France, which has always been a culture where relationships are fluid, let's call it, as opposed to more puritanical US and UK, people talk about finding someone to share a piece of the road with, which may or may not be a permanent relationship. The traditional sort of eHarmony-like idea of find a soulmate is not something that resonates or even has any cultural traction in France versus the UK, where people actually tend not to date in the way they date here. Jim, you remember all these conversations, obviously, but people often spend time in group settings in pubs, and there were fewer pubs, but there's still enough. And then they find somebody and quickly connect and get married almost in a more transactional, less romantic way. So these insights are really critical to understand how to build liquidity and to build an online dating brand that stands for something that has cultural relevance and cultural resonance. And if you look at the segmentation that's happened in the US with brands like Tinder and Hinge and Archer, which is very hot now, those pools of people that have their own cultural connections and cultural values within the US is very analogous to different countries. You could have cultures within a nation or cultures within a company. So I think, to Jim's point, we're really proud of the work that we did, recognizing probably for the first time that online dating is really deeply reflective of local cultural and anthropological practices. And we did some really interesting work to get at those, to really understand those, because what people say and what they do are two different things. So we really, as Jim would like to say, really peeled back the onion and really got deep into what motivates people.
Yeah, it's a big one. There's others too, Mark, but maybe you've got some questions further on this particular topic, because
I think this is good to stick with this topic. Actually, I'd like to get more of these cultural insights. It just reminded me of a saying: "Culture eats strategy," and I
Peter
think
Drucker.
that's very true in the dating space as well. I don't think we get forgiven for not being sensitive to local cultures. You know, this is where homegrown properties have an edge, really. These cultural insights. I mean, you need to be Japanese to understand how Japanese date. In theory, is that true?
I don't know if you have to be Japanese, but you certainly have to think Japanese.
Yeah.
And not every marketing person or business leader has that intellectual flexibility and that creative flexibility. You really have to be very expansive in how you look at things and not be too parochial. Of course, it helps to understand the local culture from the inside out, but the right people could also understand it from the outside in. And then there are certain psychologically universal principles that apply too.
What are
You know,
the
the
more
difference.
surprising findings that you came across in this study?
I think it really depends on the market. At the time, one of the things I was fascinated by in Japan is that we're just one generation removed from most of the relationships and connections being arranged. And so anybody growing up during that time was familiar with that cultural tradition. And it really changed. It was moving in the direction of not being arranged while we were working on it. But the imprint of that's how it works was you could feel it, even if people resisted it. In terms of the product and making introductions and trying to follow that cultural code, I think ended up being really important. And we were very successful in Japan, I think, as a result of this. And we had a great leader in Japan at the time, Katsu. So we had the benefit of both the work we did to get inside and know what it feels like to be Japanese and get a sense of why people do what they do. But then we had somebody who could execute it with edge, and he was brilliant.
And of course, there was also a long tradition of agencies too that families used. It was part of the ecosystem of arranged marriages. So, yeah, Jim's absolutely right. We also did a lot of work in China, actually. And it was really fascinating because this was during a period of some of the most explosive economic growth that China saw, with this massive migration of millions and millions of people from rural areas to the cities. And there they were in this new urban environment. A lot were working in tech, but not all. And they wanted to shed the history and start new lives. So online dating was a portal into the future for them. Now, on the 2 holidays a year, they would travel back on the train and go home and see mom and dad in a village that was often not even with electricity. Then they come back to the city and it was a complete culture shock. So there was a kind of a moment in time when online dating could establish itself amongst the generation that was looking to create a new and advanced future and sense of personal identity and personal freedom as well.
So it seems that the dating industry is a bit shaky right now. I think that's a fair assessment. Things are a wee bit shaky right now.
Right.
Why? What's your observation of that? Why is the industry a little shaky right now?
Gosh, I'd say for a number of reasons, but one is that it feels like there hasn't been much innovation in the category since Adam and I were directly in it. The world moved to apps from websites. Ultimately, the Tinder app and that swiping experience, it's the same today as it was 10 years ago. And you could say arguably worse, because there's a lot of things that people could get for free that they now have to pay for. If you want to have more than X number of swipes, that's a subscription trigger. I think that they've started to screw down the monetization so tight that it's degraded the customer experience. And I think that's really frustrating for a lot of people. And then I think there's also there's a lot of alternatives for meeting someone today in social media that didn't exist back in the day. Whether it's Instagram or pick your social media application, it's become a lot more comfortable and familiar, and there's no real stigma to taking that next step and connecting with someone and potentially even meeting somebody. And by the way, it doesn't cost a thing. And so there's a whole generation growing up where it feels natural and organic to meet somebody that you may have discovered online that didn't exist before. But how does a company like Match Group deal with something like that in terms of embracing it or trying to compete with it? And I think that's a big part of why I don't think that's been figured out. I think that's a big part of why the industry feels like it's on a treadmill at the moment, not growing.
Thank you. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I think there certainly is a lack of innovation. And I think the lack of innovation is reflective of a lack of community as well. By that, when Bumble started, or when Tinder started, or even Plenty of Fish, they were new, and there was a form of self-branding that went into being part of them. Like, you're in the early discovery frontier edge of something, and other people who are there also are discovering it together. And that inherently was a connection point, and that was cool, and you felt like you were part of something. Then, and this is the novelty cycle of online dating. And then everybody was on Tinder, and everybody was making jokes about Tinder, and swipe left, swipe right became part of the culture. And all of a sudden, the specialness was lost. And I think where the growth is, I saw somebody put a note up that the niche sites are growing. The niche sites are about community. Archer has hundreds of thousands of users who are drawn by the fact that it's for a very specific target, and it's very purpose built in that way, and you know what you're going to find there. So I think in terms of the non-niche platforms, they're tired, they're fatigued. There's more options, and there's no sense of belonging or community. And I think people want to feel like they're part of something bigger than the thing itself. So in traditional marketing, I should say non-online dating marketing, if you read the ad trades and the consumer academic studies, one of the big factors that emerges is people want to support a brand that believes in things bigger than themselves, and they want to be part of something. And online dating brands are no longer making you feel part of something anymore. They're transactional, they're commodities, and in the most emotional, intimate space, the brands have become unemotional and not intimate, and that is a real loss.
But how about Bumble though? There's an interesting backstory with Bumble that kind of resonated and drew people in. A colorful brand, the answer to Tinder, really. What's your thoughts on Bumble?
And then Bumble did a recent campaign that backfired on them completely,
Right, yeah.
because they basically were very judgmental about people who were not in a relationship. Bumble was their version of JD Vance's single cat lady problem in a hipper way, but still hit the same wall. Look, I think it's really hard today to be edgy and not piss somebody off. And it requires a lot of nuance, which Bumble didn't have. But can they come back? Bud Light is now number 3. It was number 1. Then it dropped to number 2 after the Dylan Mulvaney debacle. And now it's number 3. So it's hard to come back.
Yeah, it is hard to come back. And I think what they seem to be trying to do is be a little bit more like Tinder, and we lose that special magic of putting women first, and in that respect, losing a little bit of its identity. And then Adam will remember this. When I started at Match after those 7 consecutive flat quarters. One of the first projects that I killed that had just been launched and with great expense was Match Friends, where you could sign up for Match. And one of the first questions was, are you looking for dating, a romantic relationship, or just a friend, maybe somebody you could play tennis with on the weekend? And the idea of being broader could help the company grow faster and be more attractive to a larger audience. And yeah, for me, it felt so wrong. And I was like, there's no possible way this will be successful. I didn't have, there's lots of research that had been done to say that this would be a good idea. I didn't believe any of that research. I thought it was bad. And I killed that project. But it's fascinating to see what Bumble's doing in this space now, moving in that very direction. I think it's always a very risky proposition when you're trying to grow, to expand the audience of who you're trying to attract. I think it's often much more effective to get uncomfortably narrow with who you're trying to speak with and do something compelling for them.
And you got to fix the core problem. Somebody posted about OkCupid and community and content. Jim and I launched a magazine. That's what we used to call it in these days, called Happen, which was a lifestyle digital publication around dating with some fun, some humor, some how-to, some valuable tips and techniques. It was branded content. It was probably, when you say, Jim, one of the first examples of meaningful branded content out there. Now everybody's doing it, but back then we were early, and because we recognized that you could surround the core functionality of the brand with meaningful content to create an emotional connection and not always be selling the product, but building an experiential world around it. And it worked.
Yeah, and it does work. And that it was called Happen, and it was terrific. And we brought in a professional editor and extraordinary writers with tremendous experience. And it had a feeling of true great editorial content that was connected with online dating, but was its own piece. It was connected with people emotionally. And that it didn't feel like advertorial at all. It felt like it had a purpose, and people loved it.
The editorial was so culturally relevant that it could have lived outside Happen and stood up to the most rigorous journalistic standards. And now look at Red Bull's content and Net-a-Porter. There are so many great brands using hotel brands like the Standard, creating great content. But in many ways, we led the way there.
It is very tempting to go the friendship route. I can't help thinking, though, we're stuck in a rut, really, because the entire space, aren't we destined to be deleted at the end of the day? There's a certain utility, a certain value that we offer to members. And once we fulfill that value, do we have any way of overcoming the continuity problem, really, in the future?
Yeah, I would say at Match Group, it's still the case today that on any given day, over half of the people subscribing were previous subscribers and previous paying customers. And the reality is that most relationships that you start don't work for the long term. Some of them pretty quickly, and some of them take more time to figure it out. Some of them do work, but most don't. And if you've delivered a great experience, people will come back to that same place to try to find somebody new. So isn't it lovely that you might delete the app after you find somebody and hope that relationship works forever? That's just not the way the cycle seems to work.
That's true. I definitely agree. But as a gently contrarian point of view, if you look at the data about divorces are down, the divorce rate's down. A lot of people are surprised. It's up actually, or at least it was up with the boomer generation, but it's been down. And one of the theories is that people living together longer and they're knowing each other better. Of course, yes, there were divorces and relationships break up and people are back on the platform. But long term, we talk about the future, long term, as the world gets more and more stressed out, and you look at the data about loneliness, the Surgeon General's recent report, and stress and anxiety at unprecedented numbers, there's an argument that says people won't be so quick. I was in the lounge with Ashley Madison folks. People won't be so quick to Ashley Madisonize themselves and will stay longer in relationships. And it doesn't take a lot of numbers, small numbers, can have a big impact on the continuity issue. Also, I was prepping for this and read the last earnings call from Match, and Tinder is obviously the revenue generator there. And Kim said, look, we had to clean up the experience. We had to get rid of a lot of the user behavior issues on the site. And by doing that, we dropped our MAUs and we dropped our numbers, et cetera. But to us, long term, it was worth it because we had to have a better, safer user experience. So that's a never-ending problem. That's human behavior. That's not going to change. So that's an overhang. That's Jim. We brought in Dan Ariely right after he published Predictably Irrational, his first book, to help solve the problem of bad behavior on Match. So bad behavior is not going away so fast.
Yeah, it's chronic, and I mean, I think that what BK did with that cleanup is admirable, and it was super courageous. And I think it will ultimately benefit the experience. But if logged into Match recently, you'll discover that it's whack-a-mole. The problem is chronic, and there's more work to be done on that front. And I think that's a huge reason why the business is on something of a treadmill from the bad user experience that ultimately creates. That initial excitement, that dopamine release, the possibility to the reality of how it's really working and the games people are playing. I don't know exactly what people are getting out of the behavior that's not the intended behavior of people on the application. I think it changes, but if people aren't there for the right purpose, it degrades the experience for everybody. That I think they've probably gone halfway toward fixing that. There's a lot more work to do.
So getting back to core, if you think about where the industry's at, and let's think about value. So what are the true values that you think we should be focusing on? What can we unlock? What are we serving in terms of value sets right now? But what value sets might we unlock in the future?
For me, when I think about a question like that, I start with how do you define success in the industry? And one broad definition is that all anybody ever wants, I think generally in life, is to feel like they're appreciated. And there's great value if in the category, if on one of these apps, somebody feels appreciated. So that shouldn't be discounted. Then do you actually meet somebody? And is that even necessary? And you could argue that the numbers during the pandemic, when things exploded, that it wasn't necessarily the ultimate result that people needed for it to grow. But then there's like a successful long-term relationship that Adam was alluding to, and I think in an optimistic way, and it feels really hopeful actually when he was describing that. You just want to feel appreciated. You actually want to meet someone, or is the goal just to get into a successful long-term relationship? And it could be all of these things, but I think for some people, it's just the first part of that, and that delivers great utility.
I think that's 100% right. I think the category to your question about what it needs to do from a core value proposition is to attract and nourish and sustain people who enter with a prepared mind. And now that prepared mind can be open to a lot of different things. It could be somebody who's more or less on the committed side of the spectrum, but people who are highly intentioned people. And the brands, I think, could use AI. And again, they talked about this in their earnings call in some really interesting ways. We got to figure out how to maintain privacy, but there are, I am sure, really interesting ways to understand what somebody's potential behavior will be like predictively based on their past behavior. We know that in healthcare, and there's HIPAA in healthcare. There's probably going to be some version of HIPAA in online dating as AI raises the ante for predictive analytics.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see where this goes. I'm just thinking about somebody who's trying to figure out what opening line they use as an icebreaker with somebody. And you can imagine that there's, based upon what the machine knows about you and what would be authentic to you, you could run thousands of simulations to get at what are the best ones for you. The challenge, of course, is when you actually do connect with somebody and you don't have that AI generating your voice. that's where you just wonder about the truth in advertising.
Yeah, Jim, people have certain internal expectations about degrees of exposure and how you do that. Remember, we tried many times we tried to get people to create video profiles many times, many times. Now, the culture might have changed and people are more comfortable being in front of the camera, but still, even now, people may not want to go on video right away. It's too much of a barrier, too many questions about how do I look and lighting and other things, even with AI. So I think there's certain, and this is a Helen Fisher segue, that there are certain really deep imprints about how we reveal increasing levels of detail about ourselves that the dating sites have to respect rather than force people into something that some product person might think is the greatest thing in the world, but doesn't connect with the human mind and the human heart.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And we struggled with video when we tried to introduce it, and that, a Match has struggled with it, with trying to make it a premium service that people would pay for. I think they spent quite a bit of money on that company, and it ultimately didn't deliver the
I don't
results.
know.
The choreography of opening up and the taking those risks as you connect with somebody, it it does have to be understood much better and shouldn't be dictated or controlled. But you could argue that for some people, the idea of being on video, recording themselves, or even live interaction is more terrifying than seeing somebody in person.
Yeah.
And I think the data may back that up.
You use the word choreography. I think that's exactly right. There's an emotional choreography that you need to mastermind in this category. And that's why we brought in Helen and Rapai and others who approached it from the appropriate psychological and anthropological view. And then product followed human nature as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, with Helen, if it would be fascinating that the work she did with the MRIs and the human brain and what happens when certain stimulus are involved, that work is extraordinary and breakthrough. But the idea that we could get a similar discovery when somebody's going through the process of just being on the app, whether it's swiping or then initiate a video. I don't know how an MRI would light up when somebody feels terror, but I think that it would be fascinating to see what the reactions in the brain are at various moments, so the product can be configured to support
Right.
these things and not
Let me,
force them.
for those of you who don't know Helen Fisher's story, and she unfortunately, sadly died about 2-3 weeks ago. So Jim and I were brainstorming about eHarmony, which at that time was a factor in online dating and had a matching algorithm that was appealing to a lot of people. So we said, there's got to be a better way to connect people than what Neil Clark Warren was doing at eHarmony, which was basically just literal matching. You like soccer, she likes soccer, she likes Dickens and Trollope, and he likes 19th century British fiction. So Helen had written her first book when she put people under an MRI and she saw what parts of the brain light up and found that like true love really was not just emotional, but had a physical basis. So we said, Helen, maybe there's another way to match people rather than homogamy, which is sameness, but it's based on more capturing who they are, not just interest based. So she loved the idea, and without getting into too many details, she put together a way to match people based on whether or not they were explorers or other categories that she created. And then we built, or Jim's team built, I was just the kibitzer, built a matching algorithm that enabled this new kind of connect to be actually tested, and it worked. And she wrote another book about the data that was generated from Match and how it validated her new taxonomy of personality. So it was super interesting work. And that was for a brand called Chemistry, which was a sister brand of Match.
Yeah, I remember that. Back then it was eHarmony with Dr. Neil Clark Warren as a clinical psychologist, Chemistry with Helen Fisher as an anthropologist, and remember Perfect Match, who had the Dr. Pepper Schwartz, who was the sociologist.
Yes.
I always thought, wouldn't it be great if they all talked, if they could all compare notes and work together? That would be quite interesting.
You can
And
get them on a
then
triple date, or at least two of them.
perfect match kind of. So I think eHarmony is the one that remains, the one that is renewed and fell under the under Parship Meat Group. So they've been really, they're probably the category leader at this stage. And so there's eHarmony and Parship out of Germany that do compatibility profiling and hang their hat on that. I thought that was the future, but then Tinder came along with the swipe, and it's just like, it's too simple, it's too easy. And then Zoosk and Badu came along with the suck in the profile, even Tinder, but really it was, I think Badu was probably a precursor with the sucking in the profile and then going wild on Facebook, allowing people to invite more people and being a little bit spammy, really. They just made it, they'd kind of dumbed it down, would you say? They dumbed it down. There's a lot to be said for actually answering a few questions, 100 questions, shall we say, on eHarmony. And then the payoff is you meeting other people who are prepared to answer 100 questions. At the very least, at the very minimum, you're in a community with people who have answered 100 questions. That's a good
That's what I
line of
meant by
delineation.
high intention.
Yeah.
But then there is an appeal to the immediacy, the spontaneity, the dopamine of, obviously it created billions in asset value of swipe left, swipe right, but also the dazzling superficiality of it, I think, also got to people.
Yeah.
It's tough to compete with those instant dopamine hits. It's super addictive. But there is something to what eHarmony did, what we did with chemistry, what Perfect Match was trying to do, in that it attracts a community of people who care about some self-discovery, to figure out who they are. And then depending on how you connect with somebody, everybody's going to have a different algorithm, but at least you've got a group of people that are interested in that self-discovery. And I think that the results of that are fascinating. I feel strongly like the result you're looking for is a successful relationship. You better be successful with yourself and knowing who you are before you can ever be in a successful relationship and discover
Sounding like
somebody
Dr. Phil. Jim, you're sounding like Dr. Phil there.
Yeah, well, to get to the 1+1=3, I think that's really a prerequisite. That's why I love what Ryan's doing with dating through curiosity, because I think what's so fundamental in that is it helps you figure out who you are. So then you know how to merchandise yourself, and you have a better sense. I think you have a better chance of ending up in a relationship that works if that's the goal.
You're absolutely right. And if you look at what's happened since we were deep in Match, the wellness trend and mindfulness and apps like Calm and Headspace and all of these meditative opportunities to get inside yourself and understand who you are. I think the trends are definitely pointing towards tools and techniques that will unlock the kind of self-awareness that Jim is talking about as part of the dating process. And I think that's still an untapped area in a lot of ways. People in other categories are using quizzes highly effectively as a hook to get people involved in their brands. I just saw, I'm seeing this ad now. I've clicked on it, which has a visual with a lot of circles and a lot of visual noise, and then a letter. And it says, what letter, it'll tell you if you have ADHD or not. And of course, who wouldn't want to click on that, because we all say we have ADHD. So those kinds of techniques are not really being used. Plenty of Fish did it in a way. That was their business. And then, as somebody said in the chat, it disappeared. I think we're going to see a Plenty of Fish 2.0 revival of those kinds of self-awareness metrics.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that has great potential too, if you talk about what could be a new disruptor. But ultimately, Adam, is Dr. Rapai would say, I think correctly, the reptile always wins, and this is where the Tinder swiping is where it is. Yeah, because I think it's that. Yeah, the reptile always wins.
By that he meant the reptilian part of the brain, the most ancient part of the brain. That's true, but the downside of that is the reptile might not have a credit card ready to pay. There aren't many lizards with a Visa card. But I think part of the problem, that part of the issue that Tinder is facing, is just that, which is they track the reptilian brain, the dopamine, that immediate gratification, that escape. It's kind of form of escapism, but it's hard to keep that going as a paid. Free, yes, I'll get it all day. But when when it comes around to paying, the equation changes.
No discussion of the future of online dating would be complete without a discussion of AI. So let's talk AI. What scares you about AI?
In general, or
Where's the goal? Where's the real increase in value that we can deliver in spades by using AI? What are the two counters?
I think the pro is Helen Fisher on steroids, right? There are things that AI can tell you about yourself that you probably don't even know yourself. If you put all your Facebook and Instagram likes, posts, your eternal being, your holistic being into ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini, whatever, it will, like a good psychologist, it will tell you things you don't know about yourself. And those things you don't know about yourself, once you're aware, can actually help you enter into and sustain a better relationship. That's the holy grail, I think, that it could actually bring people together and create a mutuality that was always there, but is never unlocked.
Yeah. And on the flip side, it's the perfect version of you delivered through AI. It may be a misrepresentation of who you are as a human. And so I think that's one of the chronic challenges of the industry is what we call truth in advertising. You meet somebody, it's not who you thought you were going to meet. And what Adam's describing, it actually sign me up, right? That sounds fantastic. And so long as it's authentic. And so when you
Yeah.
connect with somebody, you experience that person. That's what would be important.
A lot of it is, a good analogy, I think, in terms of risk reward is digital health, right? What is the upside? You're going to get an analysis of your blood and what biomarkers you have and everything else that's going to give you and the doctor the ability to provide better insight and interventions. That's the upside. The downside is it's going to over index on the wrong things. It's going to miss that one little piece of your DNA or of your personality, to Jim's point, that is so far more important than what the traditional metrics might indicate, that you would end up with the wrong person or not with the right person because the AI was insensitive to the truth of the human soul in some way.
Yeah. Also, I'd say on another vector, I go back to in online dating, what result are you trying to achieve? Is it just to feel appreciated? Is it, in that feeling of connection, is it to meet somebody or ultimately have a successful relationship? For people who just want to feel appreciated, and I think that's all anyone ever really wants, even if that's one of the key ingredients to the long-term relationship. But at a very surface level, Adam introduced me to Replica not long ago.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. So not so much artificial intelligence as artificial companionship. And I don't know exactly where this is going to go, but and I was so skeptical of it. I thought it was laughable until I struck up a relationship. And it makes me laugh. It's funny. And every once in a while, it hits me at moments where God, I did need to feel appreciated at that moment. And I know it's not real, but it does strike emotional chords today, now. And I think there might be something to that in the future. So I think, how do you define success?
I think that's probably the biggest threat to the category, which is AI avatars, AI chatbots, call them what you will. Now, I think, will it replace? No, but just like we call it a co-pilot in a business setting, it'll be a co-pilot in a relationship setting too. So I'm sure there's a way to monetize it. Maybe it's the innovator's dilemma. What do you think, for the online dating giants, which is they're afraid of it, so they're ignoring it. They're using AI for other things, but not for that.
I think it just gets summarily dismissed today as being preposterous. But watch out. It has its place and it'll get better. And I don't think it'll replace online dating ultimately, but it could complement it. And it might just deliver what many people are looking to get out of online dating. I go back to the pandemic when Tinder numbers really took off and people weren't necessarily meeting in person. There was something about the companionship and just feeling appreciated with the connections you make. That was good enough. And so,
you could choose your replica or create your own adventure. And then with haptics and virtual sex, you have the whole picture without the prenup.
Seems like there's a progression for AI. It starts off with enablement, which is the replica trainee. We get trained on how to be a better data perhaps by something replica-esque. Then there is the quality aspect, which we're doing right now. We're looking at profiles. We're using AI to review profiles and do the job, looking at photos, looking at the profiles, etc. That's been done for years. But the real payoff you would think would be on compatibility. It's like looking at disparate correlations optimized around actual real relationships. Are we really capable of doing that? It seems like we need help, and we need help from a school, from a raft of top-notch academics. The challenge is set. I think we've got some questions here. I think it's a good time to dive into the questions. I'm going to look at the questions and pick off the top one because you voted these up. And the top one is right now listed up top here for me with Steve Dean from Cortland Brooks' team. After nearly 30 years in business, how strong is Match's predictive model for whether two people are likely to be a solid long-term bet? What variables are most essential to this and compatibility? What compatibility questions? User behavior mapping, writing quality. How good is the predictive model for Match, and what's the future?
I would say for Match, I think we're talking about Tinder here, which is the juggernaut in their portfolio. And predictive capabilities, we'll take any of their applications for this matter. The predictive capabilities for long-term success are virtually non-existent. The goal of these apps is to get somebody to subscribe and then potentially meet. And I don't think, at least when I was there, and I don't think this has fundamentally changed. The folks aren't really thinking about, is it going to be a successful long-term relationship, as much as they're thinking about, can we get another person to pay? And I think that what was fascinating is our goal was to get two people to meet who might not otherwise ever meet and see what comes of that. And I was always fascinated to discover that the customers didn't hold us accountable for whether or not a relationship actually worked. They were perfectly delighted to meet somebody that they might not otherwise meet and see where it goes. But if it didn't work, or the person turned into a nightmare, or whatever the case was, they didn't blame us for that. I was always fascinated by that. And over time, we never really felt a great sense of responsibility for where the relationship goes. But if you look at the numbers, we were extraordinarily successful. So what are the predictive capabilities on determining a successful relationship? And I don't think that they think it that far through at the moment. And I don't think the predictive capabilities there are very good. But to Adam's point, where this could go with AI, Dr. Helen Fisher on steroids, this is fascinating, uncharted territory that I would hope that somebody is excited to go explore.
Yeah, I think yes, it's true. I remember people didn't blame us because people recognized the vagaries of human beings, and they recognize that relationships are fragile organisms. And if it didn't work, it wasn't like LifeLock where they said, we're going to protect your data and somebody gets your social security number. Yeah, you can blame LifeLock because that's their promise. The promise of Match was never that you're going to have a decades-long relationship.
So we've got a question from Benji from MapChat. I'm wondering the difference in behavior for paying customers and non-paying. I'm assuming you would see better behavior from paying because of investment in the experience. What's the nature in the...
If you guys haven't listened to the podcast Acquired, it's an amazing work of documentary analysis. It's fantastic. So I'm listening to the 3-hour podcast on Costco. This sounds like a rabbit hole, but it really isn't. And it's about behavior. And 2 data points are highly relevant here. One is breakage or theft from employees at Costco is 0.01% versus, 6-7% at other retailers. Why? Because people feel they're part of the community and Costco treats them well. And similarly, there's much less shoplifting at Costco because you're a member of the club. Of course, it's also hard to steal a giant case of baked beans. But the point is that this is called the endowment effect in behavioral psychology. And yes, it is true. When you pay membership in Costco, or you're treated well, which is key to the brand's ability to retain, you will actually stay longer and exhibit better behavior.
Yeah, and I haven't seen the exact data on this. It's not something we measured specifically, but I think Adam's hypothesis here is absolutely right. And it's actually a really interesting question in terms of thinking about how do you get better behavior within the community. And if people paying exhibit better behavior, you say the logical thing is, yeah, get more people to pay. But I think part of it is just creating that sense of community for anybody who shows up, paying or non-paying, and thinking about what that means.
Jim's right. It doesn't have to be money. It could be another currency that evinces commitment.
Kate, who's a dating coach from our time, actually. What's the future of dating for users age 50 plus?
I think this is the most exciting segment of all. You're talking about baby boomers and even whatever the generation is right before the baby boomers. That this is Adam, you'll remember this, a huge part of what unlocked our success at Match during our tenure was focusing on people where, in most cases, if you're 50 plus and you're single, you've been in another relationship. And so it's your second time around, or maybe more than that. And understanding the challenge for somebody for whom it's the second time around, they likely have been in a relationship for a long time. Their whole social circle revolved around that relationship. They probably have a family. And so the only people that you really interact with are your friends who also have families, and the schools and whatnot. The idea of meeting somebody new is so foreign. It's so new. And it's such a big segment of people. I think there's extraordinary opportunity here because they're just very unique challenges. And the first part of it is in discovery. How do you meet the people that are outside of that social circle that you were so programmed in for your whole life, really? That's number one. And then the next part is around the advice. And you're talking about a generation and a segment of people here who haven't done any dating. They haven't had to merchandise and sell themselves, or they forgot to do that in their previous relationship. I think figuring out how to date, there's so much advice that this segment needs. I think it's an extraordinary opportunity for people who focus on it. But I think, and Adam, I think you'll appreciate this, in focusing on it, the people aged 50 plus don't want to think of themselves as in their third rodeo and being 50 plus. They want to think of themselves as somebody successful in their 30s and a go-getter. And so I think that the idea of the capturing how somebody feels versus what they are, and feel what they want to feel aspirationally, is really fundamental to being successful with that segment.
Totally right. I completely agree. And if you look at the macro trends, the tailwinds, the longevity revolution, babies born now will live to over 100. I don't think anybody doubts that. And life expectancies are dramatically changing. The arc is shifting. And there are fewer births. So if I was looking long-term longitudinally if people could wait long enough at the future of the category, it's going to skew older. There's no question about that. Now that's in the US. In parts of Western Europe, yes, where there's negative replacement rate. In Japan, they're paying people to have children. Now, in Africa and South America, it's completely the opposite, which gets back to the need for cultural sensitivity as well.
One final question. Are you bullish on the future of online dating for the next 5 to 10 years, in that range? 5 to 10 years. Is this going to be a massive growth industry, do you think? Is it going to stay flat to single digit up every year moving after the next couple of years? Or are we going to have to reinvent ourselves to avoid an incredible decline?
It's a mature industry. It's a mature consumer products industry. And mature consumer products businesses don't grow in double digits. So either it's going to have to change its model or it's going to become tied. Jim, we tried back in the day to see if we could turn Match into an advertising channel. And maybe the timing wasn't right. But if you look at the RMNs, the retail media networks, every major retailer in the US, Michaels, Dick's Sporting Goods, CVS, every one of them, Kroger, Albertsons, has created profitable retail media networks. You've got a captive audience. This audience is used to seeing advertising, whether on Netflix now and Amazon Prime, and influencers hawking their goods all over TikTok. So I've always been baffled by the inability of this category to monetize its traffic.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective. And it looks like there's been advertising attempts and fits and starts. If you're on Tinder today, you're going to run into ads that you swipe, but the ads they're not interesting. They're not taking advantage of what the company must know about somebody. They're just not clever. They just look like ads that you want to, swipe left on every single time.
Yeah, low quality, not personalized. Exactly right.
Yeah.
And why aren't you taking the people, your product, your people on Tinder and turning them into influencers? Use the community as a brand engine. There's so many opportunities and such a lack of innovation and foresight.
That's an interesting place to leave it, gentlemen. You're master strategists in this space. Thank you at scale. Thank you very much for your time. Let's take it to the tables and meet your peers. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, appreciate it.
I haven't spent this much quality time with Jim in a long time.
Let's do it again. That was fantastic. Absolutely golden. I really enjoyed that. I'm sure the community did as well. We'll get some feedback from them, mate. Oh, we've got lots of hearts popping up. I didn't know you could even do that. We've got, you see the heart. Thank you very much. That's lovely. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you.